My name is George Soule, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Board of Trustees for Minnesota State Colleges and Universities. And I'm a proud graduate at one of our institutions, Minnesota State University in Moorhead. Thank you for joining us today. This is a great group of people. Welcome Commissioner of Higher Education, Dennis Olson, senators, representatives, college and university presidents, faculty, bargaining units, students. I'm sure I've left off someone. Trustees. That goes without saying. So we're here today, and welcome to the people who are joining us by streaming to hear from Chancellor Olson about the state of our system. Thank you for your interest in and support for Minnesota State. We're a great institution, if I might say so myself. The number that I'd like to cite is that we impact directly the lives of 270,000 students per year. 270,000 people in the state of Minnesota, not counting their family and friends and coworkers, etc. We're a great place to work. We always try to make it a great place to work for our 14,000 employees. And we're always working to fill our state's workforce needs. That is one of our prime missions. And we educate more nurses and teachers and peace officers and construction workers than any other higher education program in the state of Minnesota. I want to thank the Minnesota National Guard, General Schaefer and Colonel Suarez, and Camp Ripley for hosting us today. We had a great session this morning learning about Camp Ripley and the Minnesota National Guard and the partnerships that we share, Minnesota State colleges and universities share with the Minnesota National Guard. I've been on 6 campuses this school year, starting last month. Marshall, Austin, Moorhead, 2 campuses, Central Lakes and Staples, and St. Cloud Tech. And I've heard stories about our partnerships at every place, and the partnerships just kind of blow me away. Yesterday, we were at the heavy equipment operator program at Central Lakes and Staples, and they talked about the great partnerships that that program has with contractors and heavy equipment dealers all over the state of Minnesota. There's a real symbiotic relationship between our state colleges and universities and many, many other private sector and public sector institutions in the state of Minnesota, true partnerships. Lastly, I'm here to introduce our Chancellor. In 2023, Chair Roger Moe, commissioned a very ambitious chancellor search process. Our beloved Chancellor Devinder Malhotra finally succeeded in retiring, and we needed a new chancellor. And we went through, like I say, an ambitious search process. I mean, we poked and prodded, and everyone interviewed this guy about 10 times. And we came out with an excellent result. Chancellor Olson hit the ground running. He's focused on student success. He cares about our students. He's laser focused on the board's #1 goal, which is Equity 2030, achieving equity for all students in the state of Minnesota. Disadvantaged students, first-generation students, students of groups that have historically not performed as well in our state colleges and universities. He cares about our students, but he's also able to make the hard decisions that go along with this job. So let's welcome Chancellor Olson as he tells us the state of our system.
Thank you, Chair Fred. Thank you so much, Chair Soule. Is that good? Good enough? Okay. So a long time ago, one of our common ancestors took a stone to a flint and created a spark, and with some dry tinder started a fire that could be shared, a fire that would warm each other, a fire that would cook food and make it taste better and also make it safer to eat. And the journey to our modern age began. Everything we do as humans starts with a spark. In that case, a literal spark. But before that, the spark of an idea. Instead of cowering in the darkness, hungry, suddenly we had the luxury to start thinking about bigger things. And one of the biggest questions that human beings have asked ourselves since we began that journey is, what is our purpose as an individual? What is our purpose collectively as human beings? Our purpose together. Once there was a spark that led to the creation of one of the first schools in Western culture in ancient Greece. And this is a school where Socrates taught Plato and Plato taught Aristotle. And Aristotle asked the same question: what is the essence of life? Oh, good, Sherry. What is the essence of life? And around the same time, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus had an answer for this, that a life well lived was a life filled with virtue, that virtue is what brings us happiness. And Aristotle had his own answer to the question, what is the essence of life? The essence of life is to serve others. The essence of life. From the beginning of when we were asking us this question, the essence of life is to serve others. And for Epictetus, it wasn't enough to just have flowery words, say what you're going to do. You had to do it. It had to be action. You had to make it matter. And it's kind of like what Maya Angelou often said, when people show you who they are, believe them. People tell you stuff and don't do it, believe them. And if they take action and do good things, believe them. So here we find ourselves at Camp Ripley, an embodiment of serving others. Indeed, the motto of the Minnesota National Guard is always ready, and they are. When there's a spark somewhere, they mobilize. The Minnesota National Guard had the highest casualty rate at Gettysburg. Those heroes made a brave charge without ammunition. You know that movie 300? Well, they had 262. 262 against 1,600. Minnesotan heroes sacrificing themselves to end enslavement and begin a different kind of America. And as Colonel Suarez said to those of us who were here this morning, the Minnesota National Guard right now is down in North Carolina and Florida helping victims of the hurricane to recover their lives. I'm proud to say our system currently serves 6,506 veterans among our student body, and that's fine. I'm very proud of that. And we do much of that we do in partnership with the National Guard. 100 years before Aristotle, Pythagoras generated, for those of you who maybe teach, developmental math or have co-requisites in math, this might be hard to imagine in this day and age, but Pythagoras, mathematician, 100 years before Aristotle, started a school of thought around math that actually became a kind of a religion. There was a religious devotion to mathematics. And the structure we probably most associate Pythagoras with is a triangle because of the Pythagorean theorem. And a triangle or a pyramid is sort of in architecture, that's the most solid structure you can have. And, even before this dawned on Pythagoras, ancient Egyptians were building structures in this shape. So that structure reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it ties into the work that we do together with the Minnesota National Guard. So this idea, if you're not familiar with Maslow or Maslow's hierarchy of needs, It's this idea that human beings have different needs, but you have to build up from the bottom. The most basic needs have to be satisfied in order to move to the next level, and those need to be satisfied. So you can't just sort of jump to the top. You have to build it from the ground up. And you know, we talk a lot about basic needs in our system. If our students are hungry, if our students are homeless, if our students are suffering from mental health challenges, it's very hard to sit and learn the Pythagorean theorem in class. And so we build it up from the bottom. And that base level is called physiological needs. So this is shelter, food, and water. And the one just above that, as you build up toward the pinnacle, the one just above that is safety and security. And where would we be without that, right? Minnesota State, how could we do our work if we found ourselves in a war zone, or if our students, you know, were starving to death, or had no access to water? You know, imagine how impossible our work would be. But thanks to the Minnesota National Guard, right, who build the foundations of that pyramid, I am confident tonight I'm going to have a meal. I think I'm going to have a really good meal, maybe right in there. I am confident that there's water for me to drink. I'm confident that I'm safe, and I bet you feel the same. And that's what helps us sleep at night. Our physiological and safety needs here in Minnesota, almost all the time, are met. And that then, and they're met because of the Minnesota National Guard and others that we train in our system to help keep us safe and keep us fed and keep us warm. And when you have that built, those bottom two tiers, you can start building up in the structure. And so the next step up in the structure is love and belonging. And the next step up, and once you get that, love and belonging, and I met my wife in college, so I think we're kind of in the love and belonging business too in higher education. And the next step up from that is self-esteem, feeling good about yourself. And then the pinnacle, the very tippy top, is self-actualization. You can't get there if the physiological needs and the safety needs aren't built. Then you can climb up. And that's where we like to meet our students in our service, is to meet them at the top of that pyramid, even though increasingly we find ourselves in the basic needs business too. Students and community members, business owners come to us with hopes and dreams. They come to us with imagination about what they want to actualize. And when we're doing our job right, we give them the key to that, the ability to self-actualize, to envision and then enact the very hope or dream that they have for themselves. You know, those of us who work in higher ed, this is a blessing that we get to work on that. If we want to serve each other and serve society, we have to work together in that way. The word service comes from an old English word, service, that actually meant religious devotion. And in a way, I mean, I think members of the Minnesota National Guard and I think the faculty and staff of Minnesota State, it's a kind of secular religious devotion that they have to their work. There's something sacred about the work that our faculty and staff are doing on our campuses. And at the root of it, it's a belief in a mission, right? So the Minnesota National Guard believes in a mission, and our colleges and universities in Minnesota State believe in a mission, a belief in the fundamental rightness and goodness of what we do, and a transcendental belief that we can always lift each other up and do better. It all comes down to actions. Words without deeds are dead. We even have a term for the kind of service where it's words but not deeds. Lip service. And so it's critical that the service we do is word into deed, that we actually enact what we do. And I'm asking all of you in Minnesota State, all the trustees, the students, I'm asking elected officials, hold us accountable. So the lip service is real service, that what's really happening is in service to each other, in service to our students, in service to Minnesota and its own prosperity. We talked about Aristotle and his idea of the essence of life. Well, the essence of the existence of our campuses is service. Advancing self-actualization for our students, our communities, and the state of Minnesota, together advancing morality, creativity, purpose, and meaning, and the realization of all potential. The essence of the system office, compared to the campuses, is to serve the state of Minnesota and serve the campuses that are actually out there doing the work with students. My vision for this system, folks together, presidents, trustees, what I hope to work on, is that we will be the most efficient, most effective, most future-focused, most inclusive, and most affordable providers of higher education, period, anywhere. We're not there yet. There's work to do. But that's where we should be going, is to be that kind of place. And to do this, we have to be excellent in operations, just like the Minnesota National Guard is. And I have a feeling some of us will see this afternoon. And we, like they, need to respond quickly, precisely, and efficiently to the needs of Minnesota. That's our job, and it's the job of the Minnesota National Guard. And we got work to do. But our folks aren't afraid of hard work. Speaking of work, my deepest roots are near here. So my family, some of you know this about me, my deep, deep roots in a community about 30 miles north of here, where I had my first taste of hard work, working as a dishwasher in a hot kitchen during June, July, and August, and had a similar experience that some of our students have of like clarifying what it is I want my life to be about. And I know many of you have had a similar experience doing something. When my ancestors arrived in the country, 140 years ago, whatever, they saw something magical about this part of Minnesota. And in those days, and still today, in Nisswa, every once in a while, it's still true, you'd be sitting out there, and you'd hear this booming sound, and you'd go, oh, thunder. And you'd look at the sky, and the sky was crystal clear, blue sky. Boom! Again, where is that thunder coming from? Well, that thunder was the sound of safety. That thunder was the sound of security. That thunder was the sound of freedom. And it was coming from here. And I don't know how far up you can hear that, but 30 miles up in Nisswa, you could hear those cannons booming. And when you knew what it was an unusually, there were no sparks in the sky, no lightning, but it was an unusually comforting sound, the sound of those thunder that came from here. Yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day. And if you drive to Nisswa from here, you will go past a lake called Hole in the Day Lake. Anybody ever noticed that Hole in the Day sign on your way up or down 371? Yeah. It's named for Chief Hole in the Day the Younger, whose Ojibwe name was Pekone Keshig. This was an Ojibwe leader who lived on the banks of Gull Lake, which is partly in Nisswa, and who at one time was the richest person in Minnesota. He was a peacemaker, and he can be a controversial figure, and there's a wonderful book written about him by a member of John's faculty, Anton Troyer. It's called The Assassination of Chief Hole in the Day, and you remember your faculty wrote it, and it's a terrific book about him and kind of his legacy. I bring him up out of respect for the fact that this was his ancestral home here, and the Ojibwe and the Dakota are still vital and strong in Minnesota and adding so much dynamism to this wonderful state we live in, and because it's the day after Indigenous Peoples Day. But what is a hole in the day? Like, what does that name even mean? So this I learned from Anton Troyer. So one translation of Bokone Keshig is what we translate in English as Hole in the Day is a guardian spirit seen through the clouds. And it was an Anishinaabe word for the Pleiades star system. So Hole in the Day is connected through language to the Pleiades star system. Last year I talked about one star. Now I'm talking about like star systems. It's 1,000 stars bound together by gravity, and it's a subject of focus in many cultures. The poet Alfred Lord Tennyson mentions the Pleiades in his poem Locksley Hall. He says, "Many a night I saw the Pleiades rising through the mellow shade, glitter like a swarm of fireflies tangled in a silver braid." I wonder the extent to which fireflies, became sparks in all kinds of different cultures around the world. Each firefly like a tiny little thing, a tiny little glowing thing on its own, but a fleet of fireflies being mighty and beautiful and inspirational, like a guardian spirit seen through the clouds. There's a wonderful poem about fireflies in Ojibwe, by the way. It's called Wa'awa'atesig by an Ojibwe language poet. And if this speech gets really boring, you could Google that and entertain yourself with that. Ancient Amazonians believed fireflies brought light from the gods to give us hope and guidance in the darkness. Little sparks inspiring and encouraging us, pushing us toward our purpose, pushing us toward our mission, like Prometheus coming down, a god, bringing down something, in that case, fire, and giving it to human beings so that that flint and that stone came together and we started to warm each other and feed each other. Earlier you saw, this was so great, for those of you who are here, you saw General Schaefer present Gina with one of the highest honors he could bestow on Gina, and that was the Minnesota National Guard coin. I don't know if those of you who are here got a good glimpse of it. It's really cool. That's a 2-star coin. So that's talking about the pinnacle, right? But it's in the shape of Minnesota, and it's got a beautiful kind of lacquer on it. And maybe if you're lucky, one of us will show you it later because it's really, really cool. These coins that you saw, they date back to the Roman Empire. And over time, particularly around World War II, they consolidated into the term that you heard General Schaefer mention, which was challenge coins. And there's a modern usage we don't really need to go into right now of sometimes how these are used. But at the heart of these challenge coins, it's meant to create a focus on the mission, to thank you for your prior service to the mission, thank you, Gina, and to call you back to that mission, to say, this is still the mission. And you carry this because you want to be called back to the mission. And the use was so inspirational, it spread to other organizations. So I'll call these non-military coins mission coins, because it's, again, to thank you for your service to the mission and call you back to the mission. Whether it's a challenge coin or a mission coin or a service is our mission coin, the point of these coins is to keep us focused on the mission. If someone gives you such a coin, they are thanking you for your dedication to this mission, and they are calling you to further service to this mission. So just remember that. If anybody gives you such a coin, they're thanking you for your service to this mission, and they're calling you into further service in the mission. And Minnesota State services our mission. We do pretty good at this. In terms of the volunteerism of our faculty and staff, an estimated annual charitable contribution from the folks here who work at Minnesota State, $15.4 million annually gifted. And if you just count the volunteer hours that our faculty and staff, our students put in, it's worth almost $100 million to the state of Minnesota. So we take service seriously. Every moment spent by our board of trustees, every moment spent is a moment in service to Minnesota. What we ask of them is so much. We serve our students, 270,000 of them. That's a huge number of students. Faculty in the classroom and staff kind of in the front lines, attending to, keeping our students progressing. I thought I'd throw out a couple of examples of some cool ways Minnesota State rose when somebody asked. So somebody asked for a aviation mechanics program at the St. Cloud Airport. I think Patty Garland was probably one of the people asking for that. Thank you, Patty. And Lori Clue said, yes, of course, and rose up. And just a couple weeks ago, we had fun up at the airport in St. Cloud, noting how that institution had risen up and said, well, sure, we can do that. And there it is. And I was listening to the radio last week, and on the radio came the voice of Annette Parker talking about the program that she and Ed and others have done. I'm going to call it a Partnership Pathways program because there's so many ways, not 2+2. There's so many ways in and out of this, but it's an agribusiness program. We know about the Center of Excellence in Southern Ag there, right? There's one here. And this is now in partnership with MSU Mankato from South. Sure, we can do that. And right here, Central Lakes College. You know, many of us had the opportunity last night to see the beginnings of that meat cutting program. That's another one where, you know, people in this part of the state said, there's an opportunity here. How do our students learn this craft? And Central Lakes College just sort of said, sure, we can do that. Well, those are 4 stories of a multitude of stories like that that happen all the time throughout our system. So our campuses serve our state. That is their essence. And our union leaders serve our state and serve our mission. So Nicole with MAPE and Christy with ASF and Jennifer with ASME and Kevin and Gary and Jenna, if you're out there, thank you. Thank you for inspiring and advocating for the folks out there in the front lines and in the classroom doing the work and making Minnesota State as strong as it is. We are so proud to have you as partners. It wouldn't happen without you. Student leaders and Students United, Lead MN, serve their constituents well, advocate at the Capitol for what students need. And, you know, Senator Fateh's committee, they love to have you come in and talk. So I'm sure there's an open door there. And campus leaders, you presidents out there, you administrators out there, thanks. It's hard work. But you are so dedicated to the mission, both together as a system and also to your campus. These smart, caring, passionate people could have done anything with their lives, and they chose this. Like Colonel Suarez, they chose the mission. They chose to do this. They all bring sparks that enact the mission. So, you know, our big strategic priority that Chair Soul mentioned is Equity 2030. I was inspired, Colonel Suarez, when you were talking about, I think you used the phrase, Minnesota's changing. And you talked about how the Minnesota National Guard recognizes we have to be Minnesota. And Minnesota State, likewise, recognizes we have to mirror and echo Minnesota and give everybody a shot at self-actualization, that ability to climb up to the top. So those of you who don't know, Equity 2030 is focused on first-generation students, low-income students as defined by eligibility for the Pell Program, which is a federal low-income scholarship program, and students of color. And Minnesota can't be successful. Our future has to include everybody. And any of you live in a town where you see a sign in the window that says, "We got enough workers, thank you"? I see a lot of help wanted signs out there. And that's us, right? Those 270,000 students I mentioned, they largely come out of Minnesota and they largely stay in Minnesota. This is where they want to be. And they are the workforce of Minnesota. So we have to close these gaps to make sure everybody's got the same shot. And not just the gaps I mentioned. There's all kinds of other ways we serve students, say students with neurodiversity or students with disabilities or other members of our student community that need to be included. There's much more work to do. We have moved the needles on student success, but not fast enough and not everywhere. And some of the other needles we need to move aren't moving. And the presidents are having a lot of conversations about this. And we're going to get there. Another big thing we're doing, big operational thing, that's been a big challenge. I don't know if you've ever been out on a mission that was a big challenge. They all are. Okay. Our big operational goal, to be excellent in our operations is something we call NextGen. And this is a conversion to a completely new record system. And we're doing it in two big phases. One happened July 1st. We flipped a switch from our old record system to a new one in finance and in, we'll call it HR. And right now we're working on the parameters for the next one, flipping that switch, which is some years in the future. And that's student, stuff that'll serve students. It's been hard, but a lot of our folks really exemplified this idea of service in it. A lot of our employees worked so hard, long days, nights, weekends, fingers to the bone trying to get this thing right. And it was hard, and it's still hard. And many of our employees, the most vulnerable ones, the contingent faculty, found disruptions in their pay. They either weren't getting the right amount or they weren't even getting any amount. And folks ground away at that and ground away at that so that now we think we've got that mostly fixed, but there's more work to do for the future to make sure all that stuff works even better and more smoothly. So shout out to all the folks that worked on this so hard, and shout out and thank you and apologies to those who suffered from having delays in paychecks or inaccurate paychecks. But sort of like a rough mission, we're going to do the work till we get it done, until it's done right, and we're doing it well. And there's that commitment to excellence in operations. And another thing that's so important to our system that we work on together is transfer. You're gonna hear more and more the word mobility, and this is the idea that many of our students choose to have a home institution, but then for reasons of their work schedule or reasons of geography or reasons of course offerings, they might opt to take something from here and something from there, and we need to make that easier for them to do that. So you're going to hear a lot of work this year around this idea of mobility. And we got to remove the barriers, folks, that stand in the way of student success. Barriers we created, our own. I'm talking to the presidents here, and I'm asking for the help of the bargaining unit leaders. We got to do everything we can to remove the barriers that make it hard for students to progress through our system. And we know what they are. We just need the will together to take those barriers down and move them out of the way. All of this is in service to students and to Minnesota's future workforce. There's good news on the mission. Many of you know, undergrad enrollment. We just got new numbers yesterday, and as of yesterday, Bill always has, where's Bill? Bill always has different numbers than I do, so jump in here. I'm going off of Andrew's spreadsheet, okay? We got a spreadsheet from Andrew yesterday, and it said that undergraduate enrollment for this fall, we get a little nervous during those first 30 days. Is it real? Is it going to hold, right? You know, all these students kind of, their names are there, but are they still going to be there? And the answer is yes. So as of yesterday, undergraduate enrollment was up 6.5% in our system. We haven't seen anything like that in a long time. And I think one of the reasons is what our legislature did for us. You know, affordability matters to students. And Senate higher ed and House higher ed, you know, stepped up. And something called the North Star Promise, if you make less than $80,000 a year, we're opening the door to you with free tuition. And something like, I think it was like 12,000 students came with the North Star Promise as their scholarship. We're not quite sure the full magnitude of the effect, but it's not too hard to see a correlation there. And that's all workforce, folks. That's Minnesota's future workforce. Minnesota said, we want to give these students a shot. So Minnesota gave them a shot, and they said, yes, please, and they showed up, and that's Minnesota's future workforce. And maybe some of those help wanted signs will start coming out of those windows. And the tuition freeze, you know, this kind of stuff matters so much to students. So thank you to the Minnesota legislature for that. Thank you. You know, we have with us actually Commissioner Olson. Thank you for your work on, you know, you actually really had to figure this all out, right? You had to figure out how it was going to work. And right in front of me here, we have Senator Fateh and Representative Erdahl, and we have Senator Rarick back there, all of whom roll up their sleeves and work hard on our behalf, Minnesota State, to make sure we can fulfill our mission. So thank you, legislators. Thank you, Commissioner, for the work you do on behalf of Minnesota State. Give them, yes, a round of applause. Once upon a time, when our kids were little, Kelly and I, on a warm summer night, might let the little ones stay up late. And as the sun finally set, you'd look out over the backyard. We had kind of a big backyard in those days. And then floating out over that backyard, they would appear. First one, then others, then hundreds, and maybe thousands of little lights hovering over the grass. Our own constellation, inexplicable, magical, right there in our backyard. Like the lamp of Florence Nightingale, these little lanterns held the promise of our future together as a family, of hope and light and warmth, of harvest, of learning, and eventually of a life of service, and ultimately a life well lived. So I look out across Minnesota State, and I see a field of 270,000 fireflies, sparks filled with hopes and dreams, our students. And I see 14,000 more fireflies lighting the path to those hopes and dreams, our employees. And you travel around Minnesota, and you see 6 million fireflies hovering and waiting to see what the thunder will bring. A sea of sparks. Sparks in service to each other, sparks lighting the way, each firefly a little spark of lightning, a glimpse of a brighter future together. Aristotle was right. The essence of our mission, the purpose of our lives, is to serve each other. Never waver in that mission. Thank you all of you, for your service to Minnesota.